Hey everybody, welcome back. We are about to start a big series on composite photography, but first thing we're going to do is show you how to use some of the selection tools in Photoshop so that when we get our images, our final images in, you guys will know how to get them all cut out and moved into the new backgrounds. The first thing we're going to do today is learn how to use the pen tool. Pen tool is great for making good, clean selections as well as really nice curves. So especially if something is really curvy and clean lines, a pen tool is a great tool to use for it. It's one of my go-to tools for cutting stuff out. The quickest way to get to the pen tool is hit the P key on your keyboard, but it is also over here in your toolbar. Looks like an old school calligraphy pen there. If you click and hold on this guy to see the options, there is the pen tool, the freeform pen tool, add anchor, delete. We're just going to use the regular pen tool, and then all of these modifiers I'm going to show you how to use keystrokes for so that you don't have to be going in and out of menus all the time, which really is the preference. So let's get started on how to use the pen tool. Okay, now that we know how to get to our pen tool, let's talk a little bit about what the pen tool is. The pen tool, in the simplest wording, is basically a way to create what's called a path around objects to select them out. Now, because this is vector-based, which means it's based on a mathematical equation, it's not based on pixels like in a picture or some of the other selection tools like the lasso tool and things like that. It creates really clean lines and really beautiful curves. So that's why we want to use it kind of as the base of what our selection will look like. Okay, so we know how to make some changes in the toolbar. We know how to get the pen tool. Let's talk really quickly about the paths panel. I pulled it over onto this screen so you guys could see. One of the things that you kind of need to know as we get going is that when you start to lay a path down, it's going to automatically generate this path over here, and you'll see it come up. So you see that little work path. Now, something important to know about that is it's kind of what I would call a temporary path. And that means that if you go away from it and then you start doing something else, there's the potential that your path that you're making could be deleted. So what you want to do is create a new path, which is going to be this little kind of new piece of paper right here, and click it, and you'll see it's called path 1 now. So that means I'm working on this path, and what I'll do is rename it. So in this case, let's just say we call it hockey player. And you can think of it just like a new layer where you have a layer of path that you're working in so that you can select them out in different pieces. You can do smaller paths, bigger paths, whatever, but you're going to want to make sure you do a new path so that way you won't lose any of the work that you've done, which they do take some time sometimes, and they'll be saved inside of your document as something you can access again. It'll be easily available to different people as well as yourself for use at a future time. So before we go any further, I want to talk a little bit about the toolbar up here for the pen tool. Up at the very top, you're going to see a few different options for the pen tool, a lot of which I'm not going to cover, but there's a couple that I want to show you guys. The first is auto add delete. I like to have that one on because that basically means I'm going to be able to click on and add anchor points as we go along without having to hold any modifier keys. And then I can delete them really quickly, and I'll show you how to do that as well a little bit later. Now, this kind of weird one that I really like is what's called the rubber band tool. And that's under this little gear icon right here. If you click that, that'll drop down and you'll see this says rubber band. Now, the rubber band tool is basically just a way for you to see where you're going with your path. I know people that hate it, and I know people that love it. I'm one of the people that love it. So if you want it on, just come up here and click this on. I'll show you really quickly what that means. Basically, if I drag out a point, you can see this line coming off of where my pen tool is going. That's what the rubber band tool does. So if I take that off, just so you can see, if I put a point down and I come over here, there is a line being drawn, but I have to click to see where it's at. So for me, I started learning with a rubber band, and then I kept it on because I got so used to it that I didn't want to turn it off anymore. So that's what that is. I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on because I use it. The other one I want you to look at is this guy right here. And this is going to be how your paths interact with the pen tool. So for instance, if I have my pen tool and I draw a square, and then I draw another square inside of it, now this is going to be subtracted from this. So you'll have a square within a square. I like that. You might need to change that depending on what you're doing with your selection, but that's just gonna change dependent upon what the actual project is. And I mean, you can see here, they combine shapes, they subtract front shapes, intersect shapes, but for the most part, I found that the exclude overlapping shapes is what you want to have selected. Just keep in mind, changing this later on is a little bit tweaky. So I would say start with this exclude overlapping shapes, and then you can change them as you go on. All right, so let's go over really quickly the basics of using the pen tool and just getting started with it. So to start with, to get a path going, you're going to click and drag out. And what'll happen is you'll have your anchor point, and then you'll have these two control arms coming out from either side. Now, as you see this thing kind of teeter-totter back and forth, that's telling you where the path is entering and exiting your anchor point. So if I let this go now, you're going to see my rubber band. And again, this is why I think the rubber band is useful, showing me where the path goes from there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make another path or another anchor point down below, and I'm going to click and drag it out just like that one. And now I have another piece. Now the rubber band comes out of this anchor point, and you can see, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these and make a complete path. So what you'll see pop up is this little circle. And when that little circle pops up, that means this is going to complete your path. So if that's what you want to do, you just click on that one. And now we have a path that is kind of an egg, I guess you'd call it. So now let's talk about controlling the shape of this thing. So if I control or command click on this point right here, it's going to make that one active again. And now I can see my control arms. Now if I control and click or command and click on this control arm, it's going to move them both up and down like a teeter-totter. So you grab this one, you can see it moves up and down. It's kind of a fun game if you get bored, I guess. And if you want to control them independently of each other, you're going to Alt or Option click that control arm. So if I Alt, and you'll see my little cursor change, then I click. Now you see it's only controlling the one side, so I can control them independently of each other. Now, when you're first starting out, I would highly recommend to try to control them both together, because once it's together, then you'd have to redo it. But experiment, play with it, do what you can. I think that really the pathing and the pen tool are best learned by experimenting again and again and again. So let's just, for example, I'm going to kind of correct this circle. Let's take this side out. I'm holding the control key here. I'm going to do this side a little bit. And then I'm going to do this side. I'm control clicking here. There you go. And that looks pretty good. That's a pretty good circle. Now, if I'm not loving this and I kind of want a little more control, I can add some anchor points. Well, how do you add anchor points, do tell? Well, it's pretty easy. Right now, because we have the auto add delete, if I have this path active, which by clicking on this I do, I can just hover over the line and you'll see a little plus sign come up. And that means I'm about to add an anchor point. So I'll click this. And now we have another anchor point. I'm going to do one more. We'll show you a circle with 4. So I'm going to find that plus sign again. And there you go. Now, if I decide I don't want those and I hover back over this one, you'll see that minus sign come up. And that one too. And that's what the auto add delete up here in your toolbar means. It means that if you hover over this, it's giving you the option to take that off. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't want that on there, but if you don't, you just click that, and now you come on over here, it's not going to do anything. But we're going to turn that back on. So now that I have these, I can control them all independently, which means I could grab this anchor point. Again, I'm holding my control key to make that active, and I can move this around. Or I could grab the control bars and move this one around. So it's just giving me a little more control overall with my circle if I want to do some different things, or maybe it's not a perfect circle, you can change that. So now that we have this circle, let's just say we don't want it anymore. We want it gone, we want to change it. Let's say we want to make a triangle instead of a circle. Let me show you really quickly. I want to show you what the modifier keys that we're using are doing before we move on. So over here, you have your path selection tool or your direct selection tool. And that keyboard shortcut is the letter A. And I assimilate that with arrow, A for arrow, so it's your arrow tool. Now with this tool, if I select this tool and then I click on my path, I can actually use it just like I would my control key. So I can select this point, I can move my control arms up and down and back and forth and things like that. And then with this one, the path selection tool, I can just come in here and select this path or deselect the path if I click off of it. So just so you know they're there, it's the A key for the shortcut, but we're going to go back to our pen tool and I'm going to show you how to select this whole path. You're just going to click the control key and then you're going to drag around it. So you see my little box and now you'll see all of these are selected and active. And you can just literally hit delete and that is gone. So now let's talk about making right angles or making hard angles, as it were. If you just click and add a point, it's going to have a hard angle coming out of it. There's no curve to it. So let's say, for instance, you want to make a triangle. Well, you just click, 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 and there you go. There's your triangle. Now that's a little sloppy. How can we get it a little cleaner? If we hold Shift, it's going to make these perfect hard straight lines. So if I click this one and then I do this one and I do this one, now we're going to have these acute hard lines coming out. Now same thing if I wanted to make a square, let's just say, if I click here and then hold my Shift key, see how this is going to make a straight line? So if I click here, if I click here, if I click here, and there, it's going to be a little off. Then we're going to have a square. You may end up using this quite a bit. It just depends on what you're pathing out, but it's good to know that you can make these hard angles coming out of your anchor points. Now let's just say you've made these hard anchor points and all of a sudden you need to change them. Well, you're not totally out of luck. What you do is you click, control click to make it active again. Just want to make sure this one's selected. And then if we Alt click and drag, so Alt or Option, click and drag that point, we can add our arms back. So now we have a curved angle on this one side, and we have the hard angles coming out of the other sides. So that's your quick ways to make hard angles, and then to modify those hard angles, or also delete an entire selection. So let's just, to finish this up, let's control click and drag, everything selected with delete, and let's start pathing out our hockey player. Alrighty, we are ready to go. So now I just wanted you to see really quickly that I have my new path called hockey player up, which I showed you how to make earlier. And this is the one we're working on. I'm going to pull this off the screen so it's not in our way. And then we're going to zoom in nice and tight. So we're going to zoom into this shirt right here. We'll start right here. And you just want to be able to see these edges really, really well to know where you're pathing out. There's a couple different thoughts to doing this. Some people will go like a pixel inside of the actual edge. Some people will go just a pixel outside of the actual edge. And then others, like myself, will try to stay as close to being on the edge as possible. They like to live on the edge, as it were. But you can do what you want. Experiment with it, see what you like better. So to get started, we're going to click and drag out our points, just like we learned with our circles. And you'll see my two paths, or my two arms come out. And then we're going to do another one, and I'm going to kind of move along this edge here. Now, if this looks a little off, we're going to grab our anchor point and just move it down just a little bit. Now, once this is selected, you can also use your arrow keys to move it kind of up and down. That's pretty close to right on the edge there, so we're going to call that okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one again. I'm just Control or Command clicking on the anchor point to move it around. And then I'm going to start to follow this. Now, you're going to get a groove for this, so you will keep practicing, and you'll kind of figure out where your next anchor point should go. As a kind of rule, the less anchor points you have, the cleaner your selection or your path will be. So try to avoid having a bunch of anchor points stacked on top of one another like this. I mean, if you have, let's just undo this one. If I have one right here and one right here and one right here and one right here, you can see how this path kind of moves around a little bit. Whereas if I come back here and I just have one, we only have these 2 anchor points to deal with. And so you can see how the line in of itself is a lot smoother just in general. So as a rule, try to keep as few anchor points as possible. So I'm coming up to what's kind of a hard angle. And again, I'm control clicking. Now to get back onto this path, you'll see that little guy. That means you want to start again. I do, so I'm going to click on it and you'll see my rubber band come back. This is kind of a hard angle here. So I'm going to just click and do a normal point. I'm not going to click and drag. And now you'll see I have kind of a nice straight line coming out of here. And then I'll just start to curve this one around. So we're starting to path this out all the way around. Again, we're trying to stay as close to being on the edge as possible here. And you can do whatever you'd like, though. If you want to stay a pixel inside or outside, that's totally fine. Okay, so we're at an interesting point right here, and this is where some of the modifiers I talked about are going to come into play. So we've got kind of a curve coming in, but then we've got this hard angle coming out. So remember that modifier key, that alter option, we're going to click this arm, and now I can independently swivel it, and I'm going to swivel it so it points up the side of this helmet here. And now we can continue our path along. And on that one, I accidentally held the option alt key, so there's that. And we're just going to kind of go around this. And again, I'm trying to stay more or less right along the edge. Here's another one of those hard angles. So we're just going to go like that. I don't want to spend too much more time having you watch me path. The best way to really learn pathing is to do it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to path around the outside of his helmet right here, just so you can see a nice tight path. And I'm going to close it around his jersey. It's going to look a little weird, but I just want you guys to see how I maneuver it, and then I'm going to talk about turning this path into a selection. So I'm going to zoom back in, finish this path, and then we will talk about turning it into a selection. So now that you've seen me just really quickly, and really actually not that cleanly path this out, I want to talk about 2 things. First is looking at your path afterwards and cleaning it up, because we went through this pretty quick and there might be some edges that we want to adjust just in case they're not the way we want them to be. So we're going to zoom back in and just control click outside of the path somewhere so those anchor points go away. So there they are, they're gone. And now what I tend to do is kind of go back over this and say, let's go ahead and make this a little tighter. So for instance, now I'm just control clicking back on the path, and I'm going to control click the anchor point that I want to change. So this one just looks a little loose to me, so I'm just going to pull it over. That looks a lot better. Same thing right here. This one looks a little bit, yeah, that looks better. And through here, I actually think this point needs to come down, and so on and so forth. So as you go around, and I did it kind of sloppy so you guys could see this, you really don't want stuff like this either, where it's not jagged, but it's definitely a bump. So usually that means there's an anchor point there that's not quite right. So just kind of go back in and adjust those things so that you don't have these little bumps and things around stuff that shouldn't have that. One of the things I heard a long time ago in photography is if it doesn't look right, then it's not right. And you need to take that into account. And the excuse of, oh, well, that's the way it really looks. Well, if it looks wrong, then that's what Photoshop is for. That's what we're here to do, is to change it. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're pathing something out. If it looks weird, if the curve is not right, then make the curve look right. That's an okay thing to do. And then another thing I wanted to address really quickly is these little gaps in here. So let's just say we were cutting out this helmet and we wanted to be able to put it on a different background. Well, these gaps would need to be gone because you can see his jersey through there. So what I would do then is we're still on the same path layer. I'm just going to go in here really quickly. And I'm just going to select out these triangles where I think the gaps would be. It looks like they're kind of right in here. And granted, I'm in at right around 800% right now, which you'll get used to that if you end up doing a lot of composite stuff. Let's just say this one too. And I'm doing this to show you because this has a lot to do with that exclude overlapping shapes that I talked about before. So because we have this selected, these are going to be subtracted from our selection. So we'll get that really nice selection to put onto a background, and you'll see what that means in just a second. Again, those are really quick. I just want you to see what it's doing. And this looks okay. Kind of a quick tip or hint is if you're going to be pulling it off of a background that's light like this, I wouldn't include a lot of the pixels that are on the outside because they'll bleed through on your final selection, your final mask, and it'll look a little bit weird on a different background. These ones are okay because in a different tutorial we'll show you how to brush those out and get those gone. All right, that looks pretty good. Again, this is not the tightest thing I've ever done, but it's a good example. And as I'm going back in, remember I'm just control clicking to make this all active. And then I'm going to control click on the anchor point that I want to move. And I can move those arms or the anchor point, whatever I need to do to make those adjustments. The biggest thing to remember here is practice, practice, practice. Pen tool is a little bit frustrating at first, so the more you do it, the better you will be. Now that we've got it all pathed out, you might be asking yourself, okay, what the heck do I do with this crazy looking tracing that I just did? Well, I'm glad you asked because that's what we're about to talk about. We are going to now turn this into a selection, and then we're going to turn that selection into a mask and use it to mask out the background. Obviously, this is really weird, and we just got out like part of his shoulder and his head, but for example purposes, it's not a big deal. So I'm going to show you 3 quick ways to turn this path into a selection. The first way you can do, and I brought over our paths panel so that you can see, is you can click on this little marching ant circle. And if you click on that, it turns it into a selection. You can also control or command click on the path and it will turn it into a selection. But since we are all about efficiency here, we're going to use our keyboard, and we're going to use the keyboard shortcut of Control or Command Enter, and that will turn it into a marching ant selection. Now that we have the selection, we can turn this selection into a mask. So I'm going to bring our layers panel in so you guys can see. So over here, if I select this layer, which is my hockey player, I'm just going to click the new mask icon right here. And there it goes. Now we have our hockey player cut out, and he's ready to do something without the rest of his body. We're not totally sure, but you can see my mask here is a nice clean path, and there's my hockey mask cut out and all that kind of stuff. Now, it's important to note that this mask is really hard. It is as hard as it gets. It's jagged pixels all the way around. In the most cases, this will not look good because it's way too hard and it doesn't look realistic in any way. But in our next tutorial, where we deal with selections and learning how to refine your masks and everything, this is where the rubber is really going to hit the road. But first we need to know how to make those selections. So if you can see right here, we've got his mask cut out, and there's the nice little gaps. So if I was to put something back there, let's just really quickly throw an orange background back there and do something kind of fun. or red. We'll do red. So if you see back here, you can see that the red is showing through his mask. And that's really going to help the realism of a composite, is when these little tiny pieces are showing through, when it's showing through a little bit of a hand, or it's showing through some mask or inside of an arm or something like that. So you can see here that the little bit of black is showing through. And again, these are all things that I'm going to deal with in our next tutorial, which is going to be talking about selections and refining edges of masks, and we'll bring it all together. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate you. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Check out our other social media channels and make sure you click that subscribe button to keep all of these awesome tutorials coming your way. Thank you, guys. Until next time, be awesome.